you've heard of Power BI cheat sheet. I will tell you a little bit more about that in a second. First of all, I will shortly introduce myself. My name is Marc. I'm working as a data and AI consultant at McCall in the Netherlands. I'm also a data platform MVP. You might also know me as one of the guys pointing out some Power BI stuff online. That's probably because I'm a huge beer fan as well. So you might see me somewhere tweeting around beer and Power BI related stuff. And yeah, feel free to find me on social media or whatever and drop me a message or link me on LinkedIn or Twitter. So enough about me. I always like to go directly into the content. So the Power BI cheat sheet. Power BI cheat sheet is something what was set up by my colleague Dave Ruiter about 2 or 3 years ago. And Power BI cheat sheet is more or less just a one-pager crammed with tips and tricks around Power BI. Can be anything related to Power Query, DAX, visualizations, whatever. We will see a lot of that in a second. It kind of went viral about a year ago. Initially, we shared it the first time online, publicly available. We had about 200 people downloading it online. But after the second share, it was picked up at Guy in the Cube. Probably all know him, Adam Sexton, and he shared it on his social media as well. And at that moment, we hit almost 7,500 downloads in 1 month, which was a
Sorry, Marc, please unmute yourself.
Yep, should be there again. Where did we lost? Okay. Yeah, what I was telling was the Power BI cheat sheet went viral about 2 years ago, and now we share it everywhere online. And actually, it's available for everyone free for download. I will share the link later. And you can see that everywhere around the world, people are downloading it. Power BI cheat sheet simply looks like this. It's just a one-pager. Not all of the content is ourselves. We always like to refer to others who share great things around Power BI. So let's dive into this. I don't want to have that much of slides. I directly want to go into demos. So from here on, it's all demo. So let's get over to my Power BI file. And what I did is I built 2 files. One of them is what I call the crap file, and the other one is the happy file. First of all, the crap file. And working for different clients, I've seen a lot of reports built by people with a lot of experience in Power BI or just starting with Power BI. So one of the things I see quite often is fancy backgrounds, something like we have here. We report something around our sales, and there are a lot of things going wrong actually in this report. And if we look at it, one of them is the background, but also I'm one of the people also shouting out everywhere online, please do not use pie charts. If you want, I can also enroll you to, for example, in a LinkedIn group, which is Data Professionals Against Pie Charts, where we share all bad practices around pie charts. This is, again, a bad example of a pie chart because we point out something around a number related to a province or whatever it is, something related to a location, but we don't know what it is. Is this number representing a percentage? Or so there are a lot of things where you can improve your visualizations. Another thing is a line chart here. Here we have a line chart, and a line chart mostly refers to something related to time from left to right. So if we refer to time, why do we put categories on a line chart? So also something I've seen a lot going wrong. Also, this report is simply a bit messy. There's too much noise around it. Things are not aligned or not correctly ordered, overlapping. So this is what I call my crap file. And I'll show you a bit later what else is crap in the data model. If we have a look at the first things we always put out in everything we do around Power BI in trainings and everything, we always share the cheat sheet with the simple practices and what you should do when you're building your data model. First of all is disable the date and time functionality, which is by default enabled in Power BI. Date and time simply messes up your data model. What we use a lot is the VergePack analyzer to check if your data model is properly modeled or not. So here I have the VergePack analyzer. You can download it online. And what we see here, and this is connected to the grep file, is that we have a lot of noisy tables here, which are all local date tables and date table templates. All these tables are generated by Power BI at the moment you enable the auto date time functionality in Power BI. And what auto date time will do is generate for every date or time column in your data model, it will generate a date dimension by default. And this can more or less blow up your data model. And what we will see here as well is especially that it is a lot of tables, which we actually don't need, but also a very high cardinality. High cardinality means actually that you have a lot of unique values. And a lot of unique values more or less means that it has a big size. Power BI works with the VergePack compression, and VergePack compresses on columns. And if it compresses on columns, it keeps only the unique values in a row. So this is actually all noise because a lot of different date tables, why not have one centralized date table? If we compare it to our happy file, what we'll show you in a second, we have one centralized date table and all other things are gone. All date tables are gone. So how you can do this? First of all is go to File, Options and Settings, then to Options. And if you then go into data load on global settings, you can by default enable it for every new file you generate. So the auto date time for new files. If you have a file where it is already enabled, you can disable it here. So the auto date time. This is the one that is, if it is enabled, is causing all these generated date table templates. So that's the first thing where we start every Power BI file. And let's just dig into creating or adding a few more columns and expanding our data model. In this one, I already created a few tables, but we're going to add a little bit more. So if we click Transform Data, the first thing we did here is simply importing a default date dimension, which we generated ourselves. And we do this in replacement of all the auto-generated date tables. Simply because then we have one centralized date table which includes everything we need. So simply, for example, a date column, a month column, year column, a week of the day, week numbers. So all this can be auto-generated, and please don't try to create this yourself. A simple hit on Google will give you something like what might look like this, which is Power Query. And all this Power Query code, you can simply find it online and insert it in your Power Query editor. How you can do that is simply go to a blank query, add a new query, and if you add a new query in Advanced Editor, you can paste the Power Query code here to generate your date table. So let's quickly do that. And now we have our date table. The second most important thing we need to do in Power BI, since I already had it, I'm going to delete this one for a second. Second thing is setting your data types correctly. Here you see that Power BI is already seeing or noticing some of the items because it's somewhere here in my Power Query script. But let's add a new table from my SQL Server and see what's going to happen then. So I have a connection to my SQL Server. And I'm going to add a new table to this. So in here, we simply say, I'm going to connect to my Azure SQL Server, connect to it. And one of the things you will see in a second is that I can put in my database and even do in the advanced options, I can write a SQL statement. I advise you to not use the SQL statement option. The only reason why I do not advise you this is because it directly breaks query folding. If you want to leverage query folding as much as possible in Power BI, I will tell you in a second what query folding exactly is. This will directly break query folding, and Power BI will try to fold your query back to the native source. So for now, I just say connect to the server, and then let me select what I want to import in my data model. So here I'm going to leverage my Power BI cheat sheet, database, and I'm going for the sales order header table. Well, let's pick the sales order detail this time. And I'm just going to click OK. And this will directly show me the table in my Power BI query editor. What you'll see is that Power BI already recognizes some of the columns and the data types. This is because it's coming from a SQL database, and it takes over the data types as it is set in the SQL database. But imagine that you import an Excel file or a CSV file. What happens a lot in developing Power BI data models, it cannot take over your data types. So in that case, always check your data types, how they need to be set. Another thing that can be really important is remove all the columns you don't need. I'm going to explain this again by showing you a bit of the VergePack analyzer, because, for example, in this table, we have the row GUID. And as I said before, Power BI works with column compression. So it will take all the unique values and save them. So the more unique values, the bigger your table will be. If we have a row GUID, which is unique for every row, is a unique value, this will use a lot of memory. So let's quickly go to the VergePack analyzer for our grep file and just open, for example, the sales order header table. And if I'm expanding this, if Excel doesn't crash, it's always fun, then you will see that the column, which is the row GUID, and which is here, in this case, for sales order header are only 32 lines of data, so it has 32 unique values. But let's do that for example with something like my address table or my customer table. Let's pick my customer table. Here it is. So it seems to be that they have around 847 customers, and if we look at the row GUID, it has the same amount of unique values. The more unique values, the higher the cardinality, the more volume of your table size it will use. In this case, only this one column already takes up almost 12% of my total table size. If you have something like this and I do not really need this column, remove it. So let's go back to the query editor and simply remove this column because I don't need it. And here is where also the leverage of query folding comes in, because when we do a right click here on the last step we did, we have an option which is showing a view native query. And here you see that Power BI generates for me a T-SQL statement, which is pushed back to the original data source, in this case, my Azure SQL database. And it's actually not even importing this row GUID column because it removed it from the select statement. So in this case, it's simply notice that that I don't do anything with the row GUID column, and it directly removes it for me. With that being said, let's try to add another step and see what is going to happen with query folding. What else do we have? We here have a modify date. Do I really need a modify date in my sales order detail table? Probably not. So let's also remove that one. And it just adds up to this Power Query line. And it also adds up to a change in my T-SQL statement. Another thing what I just noticed is that I had multiple lines with date values in it. And here I see that I picked the wrong table. So I'm quickly going to change this for a second. To go to not my sales order detail table, but the sales order header table. And the first thing I did was removing my row GUID. So I'm going to redo that for now. And the modified data that I also didn't need. So another thing what I noticed is that I had multiple rows with dates in it here. As you can see, every date is the same, but we also include a time value. And this time value is not really needed because it doesn't tell me anything. It's the same for every day. Although it is set to a date time field in my SQL database, I can still change this to a date field. As a result, it cuts off the time because I don't need that. It adds a new step, change type, and it's still taking advantage of the query folding. And what you will see is that it gets a little bit more complex already. With this, you don't have to use the native SQL statement, but you let Power BI generate your T-SQL statement. And the same happens with ship date and due date. So let's also set those to a date value. And still I'm leveraging the query folding with View Native Query. So let's check out what else do I have. I have a sales order ID. Another thing that is really important is taking into account that you probably want to reuse your data model at a later moment for self-service purposes. So if I'm going to change all my column names to something more reasonable for my end user, because it's coming from a database, so this is camel case or Pascal case, I always confuse those two, but there are no spaces in it. So what I can do is manually change it and put everywhere the spaces in between. But that's a whole lot of work. Luckily, we can do this a little bit smarter. So let's remove this step and see how we can do this in one go for all my columns. So I'm going to quickly steal something from this one, whereas this is one of the tips and tricks which is on the cheat sheet created by Alex Powers. He shared it also on his GitHub where he has a good example how you can do this yourself and just leverage his code. So I'm going to copy this Power Query code and I'm going back to my just imported table. And what I noticed here that he did it after the remove column step. So I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to do one step back and here I'm going to insert a new step. Insert step, yep. And what I'm going to do here is just paste the code what I just copied. So let's do that. And you'll see that all my column names change directly and everywhere I inserted spaces, which is better readable for my end user, better readable for later purposes. What probably will happen right now is that my change type is broken because I inserted it in between, so these columns doesn't exist anymore. What I can do is or change them manually here because I just need to add a space, or use the full functionality of the applied steps pane, the query settings on the right. I could also just have deleted this one and do it manually again. So let's quickly check. What else do we have in this table what I probably don't need? We have a lot of information about our customers and values from the subtotal, tax amount, whatever we have. So let's keep all of that. Here we have a lot of columns which are referring to other tables in the same database. Actually, it sees that there's a relationship between this sales order header table and other tables. In this case, the address table, not another relation to the address table, the customer table, and sales order detail table. One thing that I didn't do yet is changing my table name. I already changed it a few minutes ago to the sales order header table, but still this is not very good readable. So let's zoom in a bit. What we see here, it takes the name from the SQL database. So what you'll see here is that sales LT, sales order header. But only thing I want to see is sales order header. So I can easily change it here. And again, this is for the same reason as we changed all our column names to make it better readable and better usable for reuse for on later purpose for self-service purposes. So when I've done all this, let's say I've done everything I want here in the query editor, I can now just say close and apply, and it will load my table to my model. So let's do that. And when it's importing my file into the or the table into my file, I quickly go to the Virtspec analyzer for the happy file. And that's the file where we took all our best practices, removed all columns we don't need. Let's have a quick look at the total size of our file. Here we have the table sizes. If we add them all up, we end up at 1.6 megabytes. So let's compare that with our crap file. And if we have a quick look at our crap file, where we just imported all tables, but we didn't change anything. We kept all the unique values, the row GUID columns, everything we don't need. And we had all those sales and local date table templates. In total, it added up to almost 3.2 megabytes. So that's double the size. So let's say we're done now with loading the tables. There's one thing left. We need to set relationships. And as you can see, some of them are already set in this model, although it looks a bit messy. So let's rearrange some things. And what you can see is it is a bit messy, but that is because there's another functionality in Power BI which tries to be smart. And that is a setting which we can also find in options and settings, which searches for relationships within your data model. So if we go here, and I always need to quickly find it because I always disable it by default. And I think it is in, should be under data load. Yeah, here it is. The part about relationships. If we have a quick look at it, I only enabled the functionality where it imports relationships from the data source, but only on the first load. The reason why I do this is it takes over the relationships from my SQL database right now. But if I also allow it to update and delete relationships when I'm refreshing, imagine that somebody's messing up with my SQL database and I'm refreshing my data set in the Power BI service, it might result in different numbers, different values in my report. So it also messes up my report and I don't want that to be happening. So I disabled this one. And another important one, auto-detect new relationships after data is loaded. If you enable this functionality and imagine that you have two tables, which are both having the column with the name ID and having an integer as data type. What Power BI will do based on column name and column type, it will automatically try to connect it if it has a possibility to be a relationship. So what will happen is that Power BI automatically detects them, but you create a lot of relationships which are probably not valid. So for that reason, I also disabled that one. So let's see how our model looks right now. We have sales order headers and our sales orders, and those are connected with a one-to-one relationship to my address table. And I have something with product and the product description, but those are not linked yet. Somewhere I need to link those two together. So what you will see here already, for what I've already done in my sales order table, I've hidden all the items which are on the many side of my relationship. For example, here I connected my customer table to my sales order table, and on this sales order table, I've hidden my customer ID. That keeps my tables clean, and I avoid the risk that I'm creating a measure or whatever by using the ID from the wrong side of the relationship. Another thing we wanted to do is link the product to the sales orders. So let's see, we should have something product related. And because I disabled the functionality that it automatically detects the relationships, I need to link it myself right now. So let's see where we have product ID. Only in my product table. So there we have a problem. We cannot link it together. So it might be that I need another relationship, but let's not mess up that much time for this right now and continue on. The same happens with my date table. I don't have any relationship with my date table. So let's connect my sales orders, the sales order date with my date table. And I can easily drag and drop this to create a relationship, and it creates a one-to-many relationship. That directly means that now I can hide it from the many side, and I can easily do that right here. I can just click the toggle here, and it hides my order date. I could also have done that with a right click on the column name. One question that's asked a lot to me is, what if I have multiple dates in my same table? Because I had also a due date, I had an order date, I had multiple dates. What I'm gonna do with that? Is it the best practice to create multiple date tables? No, to my opinion, not. Simply because then you will have the same result as we had here in the crap file with a shitload of date tables, and we didn't want that. So what you can do is create simply another relationship between the other column and the date table, which will be an inactive relationship. Inactive means that it's a dotted line, so it's not a solid line. So it's not enabled for any visualization or whatever, but we can still use it on purpose if we want in DAX by enabling the relationship with some DAX statement like use relationship. So let's say we're done now with our data model. there's one more thing what we need to do. We have a one-to-one relationship here, which is inactive, which means that we cannot relate our customers to our sales orders. And let's try to enable that, because what you will see here as well, that this is a bidirectional or a both direction filter, because it's a one-to-one. And let's say that we want to make this a one-to-many, and then we can set it to single. And on another end, let's try to make this active. And what we get here is that there's already an active relationship between the customer and the sales order header, simply because it otherwise creates a circular dependency, because there's already a relationship in this direction. I see that Rishi noticed that he already covered this, so let's not try to waste that much time on this, and we don't need this relationship probably for the demo purpose. So let's go back to our report, and let's start creating our first measures. So what I always do is expand this a little bit. We want to do something with our sales orders, and let's create the sum of the subtotal. Subtotal in this case is per sales order. So what a lot of people are doing is just drop it in here, and we have a metric, and let's just do that by order ID or something to keep it simple for now. And one thing you will see right now is that it also creates a lot of different bars, and it's because what you will notice here is that it is still a different data type. So here we have a sales order ID, and the sales order ID is now formatted as a whole number, but actually it's an ID. So why not set it to general and format this just as a text, because we don't need it for any other purpose. Another thing we can do, if I'm dropping in the sales order ID here, it will probably create a sum for me. And that's what you will see happening right here, or a count in this case, but it can also do a sum, whatever. But actually that's kind of useless, because a sum of an ID doesn't tell me anything. It's just a unique identifier for this sales order. So one thing I need to set for every column as well, in this case the sales order ID, is the default summarization. The default summarization here is set to count. But if in case it is an ID, I prefer to set it to do not summarize. So don't do anything with it. And if I'm now dropping it into a new one, you will also see that the ellipsis here is gone. And it doesn't do anything yet. It adds it to the axis, and that's what I expect it to do. So let's recreate this one. And do we have something else for orders? Or by account number, doesn't really matter that much. So we have a visual now. What I wanted to show you is that now I created a sum for this subtotal. But imagine that I have it right here, and at a certain moment somebody tells me I want to have another one for subtotal, another measure, or another visualization, subtotal by product color. And if we direct it in here, we don't have an active relationship, but that doesn't really matter. It does matter. Let's try something else. So let's do it by ship method. And also by, let's do it like this. But let's say that at some point we want to change the definition of our subtotal. What we need to do right now is that we need to change every visual here to include another measure. So what I advise you to do, for every metric you want to report on, first create a measure, a calculated measure, instead of creating or using the default summarization. We can do that by leveraging the quick measures functionality, which is in the top ribbon here in the home section. And if you use the quick measure, there are a lot of default summarizations available which will generate your measure. For example, I can do an average per category, or a time intelligence related, running totals, whatever, a lot of standardized things for complex decks, which are made easy for you. Something else you can do, what I always prefer to do, is create a measure myself. The reason why I want to do it myself is to be aware of what is created and also influence a little bit more what my measure will be and how I will name it. Another thing we have as a best practice is a sort of naming convention for measures. So let's say we wanted to create for the subtotal, we wanted to create a measure. So what I can do here is subtotal and then the sum of subtotal. I think it was this one. As a naming convention, what we want to do here is we're talking about dollars. We're talking about an amount of money. So what we do here is add a $sign up front. I will show you in a second why this is important, because now we have it here. I can just leverage it, drop it in. But maybe I want to also create an average of the subtotal. So what I can do now is create another measure. And it's again about dollars. It's again about the subtotal. We want to have an average, and it was this one. But what we will do now, because we're talking about average, we add the abbreviation for average in the end. And this will nicely group together all our metrics which are about the same metric. So both are about dollars, both are about the subtotal, but one is the total and one is the average. Imagine that we also do a min, a max, or whatever we want to have. They will nicely group it together. Another option what you can use is the usage of display folders. So let's quickly go back to my data model here. And within the sales order table, we created these two metrics here. You will see them here. They're little calculator icon. Notice you that it is actually a created measure. What we can do here is leveraging display folders. The good thing about the model view is that you can also bulk edit items. So when I select both of them, I can bulk edit them and directly include both of them in a newly created display folder. So what I can do here is my subtotal measures. And it will just create a folder. It makes it easier for me to find them back in a later moment right here, because now we have a little folder created here. Another thing what I want to point out is about the model view is the creation of descriptions. Every metric you create, according to our best practice, should have a description. And description simply means in one sentence explain why you created this measure, on what purpose, and what is it representing. So here we can just type the average subtotal column in sales order table. It is more work, yes, it is. But in the end, if I hand over this data model to my colleague who continue to work on this, at least he can find out why I created this measure and where it is intended for. So by simply adding a short description, it will make it easier for handover to others and also for self-service purposes. So now we've done that, and we just talked about the case that we wanted to have or maybe change our definition for some reason. If we want to change our definition, we can simply change one metric right now. And if we change this one, it will automatically affect both of my visualizations if I use this one instead of the default summarization feature. That makes it easier, and I change all of them in one go. Something else that I see happening a lot is, for example, the usage. You want to have a nice look and feel. You want to avoid to have something like this, what I had in my script file. So what a lot of people are doing is, for example, adding square boxes and whatever. So let's say I'm going to add a square here because I want to have a nice header on top. And I'm going to add a text box. Title of my report. We put that somewhere here, make it a little bit bigger maybe. whatever you want to do with it, and make it look better than this one, I hope. But this will add a lot of new objects to my canvas, and a lot of new objects directly means, and we can see them in the top ribbon if we go to the selection pane. We see that we have 2 items here. Both of these items take up are in a layer on my report. Can be really confusing what you just saw happening. If I select this one, my title is gone, but hover over it gets really annoying. So what I always advise to do is start leveraging something simple like PowerPoint for creating a background. What I did here, for example, is creating a background by just in PowerPoint adding a bar, in this case on the bottom, add my logo in it, maybe some default stuff. And what I can do afterwards is simply import this as a background in Power BI. If I just go to the page settings, page background, I can add an image in here. By adding this image, just select this one, make it fit and set transparency to 0. We directly have it, but it's not an object on our canvas. So we don't have that annoying functionality. We don't have that annoying functionality that we directly click something which is overlapping with somebody else in the layers. If you still want to do this for whatever reason, take advantage of grouping. Grouping is something that's in Power BI for a few, I think, almost half a year now, because I might be moving this, but not on purpose, and I want to move them both in at the same time over my canvas. So what I can do is I can group them together. If I click both of them, I can do a right click and say group. The same experience as we have in PowerPoint, for example. And I can give this group a name, a report. We call this a report header. One thing I didn't give a name yet is my text box here and my shape. One thing that's good to know here is that if I rename the shape, I can simply double click it here and say, this is the header bar. And what it's actually doing is filling the title field here, because this is my title. But my title was disabled, so I can still leverage the functionality of having a title and having a clear overview of all layers I have in the selection pane. I can do the same here with the title text field, which makes it easier for me to see what object am I actually clicking here, what am I looking at. This will make it a whole lot easier to, in the end, work with Power BI without having all those noisy objects. Another thing that can be really confusing. So let's go back quickly to this page. And here I had 3 visuals. In Power BI, you have the functionality to add themes to your report. By default, you have the Power BI default theme, which is this blue color. But also check out, for example, when I change this to something else. Everything is green. Everything is whatever color, but you might want to change one of them. And if I go here to the format pane for this visual, I can change my data colors to something different. I advise you to only use these colors and the suggested colors, because the reason why I want to advise you that is, let's see what's going to happen when I click a custom color here. If I just selected a custom color from the color picker, and what happens now when I'm changing my theme, everything changes except the one where I chose a custom color. If I have chosen a different color here from one of the suggestions, for example, let's pick this yellow color, and I'm changing it. It simply takes over the color referred in the same position in the new theme what I'm using. So this changes with the theme itself, and custom color not. Themes can now be generated from the customized current theme from within Power BI, but to be honest, this is still a little bit limited. If you really want to take a next step in creating your own theme, I advise you to use something like the website powerbi.tips. So if we go to powerbi.tips. Powerbi.tips are a few guys who create a great tool, which is the advanced theme generator. And the advanced theme generator will help you to create your theme file. by simply creating your color or adding your colors here for your color template. And in the end, you can set all properties according to the visualizations if you want to have the legend enabled or disabled and all that kind of things. And in the end, download your theme. So let's change a few things, and I'll show you what a theme like this can look like. And download it. If we open a download or open the JSON file, which is the definition of our theme, I already had one here. It is a JSON file, but if we open that with, for example, Notepad++, it looks like this. And what will easily happen if we forget one of these brackets, it will break our theme file. And a broken theme file cannot be imported in Power BI. So do not try to create something like this yourself, but take advantage of the tools that are available online. For example, Power BI tips, but also other Github repositories, which are having all the properties listed, what you can add to your theme file. There's a good example of, in the Power BI cheat sheet listed as well, where you can even add your background image to your theme file, which makes it a whole lot easier that as soon as you create a new page in your report, it directly adds the appropriate background. It makes it easier for you. So let's say we want to import our own theme. We can simply go here, browse for themes. And if we go to the right folder, import this JSON file, and it directly changes all my colors according to the theme I've created. What else can we talk about? The Power BI cheat sheet covers a lot of different kind of tips and tricks. For example, something like, let's quickly look it up. For example, things like Power Query related tips and tricks. So how can I improve my Power Query? But this is a good one, actually. What I didn't notice when I was importing the tables in Power BI, always prefer import over direct query. Simply, direct query looks to be live or near real time. But in fact, direct query is caching your data, is slower, and you don't have any, or at least very limited Power Query functionality available when you use direct query. And see it also from the other side, other perspective. If you direct query all your tables, it might happen that you're continuously causing performance impact on the database. If you're reporting on top of a production environment, production database, this might have big implications. So only use import. I also noticed something about query folding. That's a really good advantage. The prefixes and abbreviations, suffixes for your measures is something that's really useful. We talked a little bit about the themes and the report layout, how you can really quickly improve that. We didn't do that much yet about graphs. We can do a little bit more with the graphs. So if we go back to this one, Power BI has a whole lot of native visuals in it, with, for example, things like the bar charts, pie charts, whatever we want to have. One thing that can be really useful is, in case you cannot find the right visual, is import a custom visual. And custom visual can come from AppSource, and AppSource is the marketplace online with all the different Power BI visuals. My advice should be to only use custom visuals which are certified. We can see that with the blue check mark, which is on the visuals. The reason why I'm saying this is that those visuals are checked by Microsoft as being stable, the right visuals for Power BI, being updated on a regular basis, or at least being looked after in case something is broken, caused by a Power BI update or whatever. What you also will see is that, for example, this one is not a certified visual. But something that can be really useful, let's just import one. This one, tornado chart. You see that it's added here to my personal environment for my visuals. But I can also, because I more or less hate pie charts, I can remove pie charts from my default visualizations. And as you can see, I don't have it at all because I hate pie charts. So I simply removed it. And that's linked to my personal account here, which I'm logged in with. What I can do here is by right-clicking, I can unpin this visual. And if I unpin it, it will remove it from my personal settings. For now, it's just right here. I can repin it if I want to have it back, but I can personalize my visualizations, what I'm using quite often and what I'm using in my reports. So that about visuals. Something else that can be really interesting, what I've seen a lot in different reports as well, is that people add a whole lot of different visuals on one page. For example, if I want to have multiple cards with multiple values on it, I can do something like this and make for all of them a card. So if I have something like this, what I see sometimes in reports is that they like a look and feel with something like this. But if I, in fact, when I'm doing this, I'm creating six visuals. But this is really slow when I'm opening my report because it's rendering 6 different visuals. And 6 different visuals actually means that it is running 6 different queries to my data model. And again, 6 different queries can slow each other down as a noisy neighbor. So I could have done the same by just creating a table. So always try to limit the amount of visuals you use on your canvas to the minimum as possible. Simply because less visuals is less queries on your data model. Let's quickly look if there are any questions at this moment. If I have any advice to organize the model view, it can get very messy with many tables. Yes, I have one actually. In this case, it is not that messy yet, but imagine that you have a data model where you have maybe multiple fact tables. In case you have something like that, there's an option here to have multiple views on your data model. For now, I just have one, but let's say I create a new view on my data model. I can just drag in a table, the sales orders, and by right-clicking here, I can say add related tables, and I create a smaller view and a small star schema of only everything that has a direct relationship in first line to my sales order table, because it was the first one I added. So I can do something like this. This is my sales order, and I create another one, for example, from the address table, and give me everything that's related to my address table. With this, I can create small increments, small setups of the same data model, which makes it easier to have a better overview of how things relate to each other. Any other questions at this moment? Somebody noticed as a best practice, do not allow users to add custom visuals directly from app source. Till some extent, I agree. Yes, you can fully disable the functionality that they cannot, from an admin portal perspective, you can disable that people add custom visuals to their report. But take into account that this mostly affects the Power BI service. So you can still do it another way. If you cannot add them here from app source, so if you disable it, I cannot access this environment, but there's still another option. What you'll see here is there's also an option import from file. And import from file from Power BI Visual Gallery, powerbi.com, you can download all the visual files. And if I have a visual file, for example, I can still import it. So that will not fully disable the custom visual functionality for your end users. And I see another question. It seems that I can't delete a custom visual after I edit it. I'm not sure about that, to be honest. Let's try if I can remove this one. I think you're right. I don't know why. It was here someday. With a right click, you could remove it. To me, this looks like a bug, so I advise you to log it on the issues.powerbi.com. And probably they can fix it in the next release or not. I only have 5 minutes left, so I want to give the next presenter a little time to set up his presentation and everything. If there are any more questions, feel free to drop them now. I'm still here for at least the next 5 minutes. During this, I hope I gave you a lot of small tips and tricks about what can improve your Power BI experience. The Power BI cheat sheet covers a whole lot more than only the ones I've showed you right now. So you can download it from free online with the link, which is on the screen right now. One other thing I like to point out, we have the cheat sheet now in different languages. If you want to have it in a different language than that is available right now, feel free to send us a message and we are happy to send you the editable file so you can translate it. Another thing, we have also the Github repository for the cheat sheet on the right top. If you have a really good idea and you want to share that with others, contribute to our cheat sheet. It is available for all of us. It's a community thing. We're happy to add it. So let us know via the GitHub link. With that, I want to finish my presentation. Maybe 4 minutes earlier, but as said, I hope that I can give a little more time to the next presenter to set everything up.